Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for coming to the last pension retirement and the agent seminar for the first half of 2023. So this week, we are very lucky to have Catherine to present her research work. But then before we start everything, before we begin the proceedings, we still need to acknowledge the traditional owner, particularly the Bidgo people, who are the traditional custodian of the lands on which this meeting currently, where we are right now at the ABS, takes place, and elders past and present. So I'd like to introduce a little bit about Catherine, today's speaker. Dr. Kathleen McKiernan completed her PhD in economics from University of Minnesota in 2018, and she got her BA in economics and Spanish literature, Hola, from the University of Notre Dame in 2012. She's a quantitative macroeconomist with interest in government policy and incentives policies gave to households. Her current research focuses on the impact of reforms on the existing social security system, with particular focus on cases in South America and issues associated with aging and late life consumption.
Okay, well, thank you for having me and for that introduction. So I'm Kathleen McKiernan. I'm an assistant professor at Vanderbilt University. This is joint work with Neha Beralaya, who's at the University of Southern California. And we're looking at retirement and Social Security claiming decisions. So we're specifically focused on the US here. The big question we're looking at is, why do individuals claim their Social Security benefits at the ages that they do? So I'll give you more details of kind of the puzzle we're looking at as we go forward, but quickly to kind of give you an idea that in the US, you become eligible to claim Social Security at the early retirement age, but any claims prior to whatever your normal retirement age are entail a penalty for the entire period that you're receiving benefits, and delays past the normal retirement age give a credit. So there is a difference in the size of the check you receive depending on the age at which you claim. And many workers, if their goal is to maximize the amount of benefits they're receiving from the system, should be delaying these claims. And I'll go a little bit more into what I mean by should be delaying as we go forward. But if they want to maximize what they're getting, they should be pushing their claims until later. And this is really important because the Social Security system is the largest public annuity in the US. And these older individuals who have this mortality risk should be valuing the insurance that these annuity and Social Security is giving them. But it seems like they're not necessarily valuing it as much as maybe a conventional economic theory may predict. This is super important for policy. Maybe it doesn't make as much of the news here, but all over the US news is that the US trust fund, Social Security trust fund, is going to run out of money by 2033, and they're going to have to cut benefits or change the system in order to sustain the program. And we want to kind of think about how do workers going to respond to this policy. If we don't understand why they're making the decisions that they are today, we're never going to predict correctly how they might respond to a policy reform. So if we're thinking about how do we change the system in order to make it sustainable long term as populations continue to age, we need to understand why they're doing what they're doing today and what are the mechanisms behind their choices today. So some more details. I kind of alluded to this. Your Social Security benefits can be claimed as early as age 62. So 62 is the early retirement age, but you're eligible for full benefits at the normal retirement age. That's dependent on the birth cohort from when you were born. For the cohort that we're going to look at and focus on here, that's going to be 65. So any claims between 62 and 65, there's a penalty. Any claims between 65 and 70, there's a credit. These aren't small. For this cohort, if they claimed their benefits at 62 instead of 65, the check that they received from Social Security Administration would be 20% smaller than had they delayed to 65. So it's a pretty big number, especially when you think about this as the size of the check you're getting from claiming until death. Historically, the early retirement age has stayed fixed. It's been 62 since the Social Security Administration was set up in the Social Security system, but there has been movement in the normal retirement age. So for current generations, myself and earlier ones still, it's now 67, but the early retirement age has remained fixed. I told you that many workers should be delaying claims. This is what I want you to think about. This graph is going to be kind of the baseline, simplest theory I can think of when workers may want to claim. What I'm showing you here is a graph that shows the present value of the total Social Security benefits received based on the x-axis is how long a worker lives. The y-axis is the present value. Each line represents a different claiming age. So the blue line is claims at age 62. The red dashed line is claims at age 65. The yellow line is claims at age 70. So you can see here there's a trade-off associated with earlier claims. You get benefits sooner, so you begin receiving benefits and get them for additional years, but because of the penalty, the slope of how that present value evolves is going to be flatter for earlier claims than for later ones. So the longer you live, the more that those penalties compound, and there's going to be a point that even though you are getting benefits for additional years, the penalty is going to outweigh those extra gains from additional years. So what I've put on this graph here are kind of these crossing points. So we can see that the first one between the red and the blue line, between 62 claims and 65, if a worker expects to live past around 78, they're going to receive more by claiming at 65 than at 62. They have to live until 93 in order to get more by 70, for this cohort specifically. Conditional on living to age 62, the average life expectancy is around 80 and a half. So if these individuals have lived to 62, they should on average be expecting to live another 18 and a half years for this cohort. So on average, people should be pushing claims to 65 instead of claiming at 62. Obviously, there's a lot of variation in life expectancy around that point, but just thinking about how that average lines up is kind of like that simplest theory I want to think about. And when I said many workers should be delaying claims, this is what I'm saying, that many workers should be pushing claims to 62 because the average life expectancy is beyond the point at which 65 claims outweigh 62 claims. What we're going to do here is we want to think about all of these different mechanisms behind why people might be choosing their claims at the ages that they are. So we're going to document empirically some different, what we'll call claiming frictions. They're going to be classes of mechanisms that may deviate a decision from that present value calculation that I showed. That might make it that you have other motives instead of just maximizing the total amount you receive. We're going to build a life cycle model of consumption, savings, retirement, and Social Security, and structurally estimate it. And then we're going to do some counterfactuals to kind of understand how important various channels are. The channels we're going to focus on that'll dig more into our marital benefits. In the US Social Security system, there's special rules that go along with married individuals. There may be a precautionary motive, so due to unemployment shocks or different health outcomes, maybe workers are liquidity constrained late in life and they cannot afford to delay claims or push claims later, and that could impact the age at which they're claiming. Maybe they have no idea what the rules of Social Security are, or they don't understand or know exactly how long they're going to live. Those would be another thing we're going to think about. Or maybe they want to leave bequests, and that could change when they want to claim their Social Security benefits. There are huge literatures on this. We are by far not the first people to think about it, but where we kind of think that we're fitting into this is trying to marry the empirical literature with the structural literature. So there's a big empirical literature on different claiming motivations. And so we want to take mechanisms that have been identified in these literatures and use the structural model to understand how these different mechanisms may be different for different people. Okay. What we're going to find is this quick preview before I move on. All the claiming frictions together, so all of those different groups that I had, the marital benefits, the employment or the precautionary motives, misbeliefs, and bequest motives, are going to explain 78% of total early claims. Not to say that the model doesn't predict more, but these frictions will predict 78% of what we see, with the remaining being the variation in life expectancy that could make it that present value calculation you should be claiming differently. There's going to be heterogeneity in how much these various channels are important for different people. So we're going to see that employment outcomes are going to be very important for lower wealth individuals, whereas misbeliefs or not understanding the system are going to be really important for people who have wealth, either through the form of college education or the insurance that comes with being married. We're going to do a policy experiment where we increase the normal retirement age to 70. So we just push it all the way up to 70, meaning any claims before 70 entail a penalty. So with these frictions in mind, even in the world where we have this policy go into effect, if we have these frictions that are deviating you from the present value calculation, it's going to limit the ability to adjust claiming behavior in response to a policy change. So people aren't going to be able to delay claims even though they're now taking additional penalties based on the new policy. And that's going to mean we're going to get really wrong the impact on how much the Social Security, how much this reform might save. So for instance, the aggregate benefits that are paid out are going to be 40% higher than if we are, 40% lower than if we had a world where none of these frictions were around. So if I simulate this reform in a world where we don't have any of these frictions, we're going to predict that the total payouts from the Social Security system are a lot higher than they would be, because people are going to adjust their behavior more and they're not going to take as large of penalties. I don't want to make a stance on what I think about that number being greater than it is, than we get in our model, but so much as to say that this is a big number that we're going to get really, really wrong if we don't understand the behavior. Okay. I don't need to roadmap. I'm just going to keep moving. So I showed you the present value graph, and that graph said that if you expect to live past 78, you should be pushing claims to 65. What I'm showing you here is the actual claiming behavior of a cohort of men born between 1931 and 1935. From this, we see that almost 50% of these men claimed their benefits exactly at age 62 when they were eligible, and 70% had already claimed by the time they were 65. So even though the average life expectancy is beyond that crossing point, 70% of men in this cohort, and this is consistent, stays around with other cohorts, but 70% already did. They took a penalty and they're getting less. So we kind of want to understand why. So what we're going to think is we want to document some stylized facts in the data related to 3 different classes of our claiming frictions. So remember, I said that I want to think of these claiming frictions as different things that could deviate you from only choosing claiming age based on the present value of benefits received. So the first one we want to think about is that present value calculation I talked about doesn't incorporate these things like health status or employment impacts that could change what your income looks like as you're nearing retirement or throughout your life. So those are going to be the first things we want to look at. Maybe that there is some liquidity element or some budgetary element that is impacting decisions that's not just in the present value. The other class is going to be maybe these people can't perform this calculation accurately. Maybe they have mortality differences. They don't know exactly how long they're going to live. So we're going to look at subjective mortality, how long they think they're going to live, as well as some sort of limited information about Social Security. They don't know all these rules. Finally, maybe the present value is just not the correct calculation. So maybe you have a bequest motive. You want to leave generational wealth, and that's not incorporated in this present value at all. So what I want to do is I want to look in the data, and I want to look at if any of these, if there's any footing for why I should be studying these. I don't necessarily want to take any of this as like a causal impact so much as I want to motivate the mechanisms in the model and whether we should be thinking about them at all. So the first thing, we see that the probability of early claiming is going to vary based on health status at retirement. This is at retirement. We played with lags and it didn't matter. Health status and employment status. So here I'm showing you the probability that a worker claims Social Security prior to age 65 based on their self-reported health status at their claiming age. We see that those who report being in the lowest health status, what we call fair, are much more likely to claim their benefits early than those who are in better health at claiming. If we think about employment, what I'm showing you here is whether or not they report working in the year of claiming, as well as lags prior to claiming. So this first one is the same year that they were, at the same year they report claiming, were they working or not? And we see that those who are not working in the year of claiming are a lot more likely to claim early. Now, I cannot see which event comes first, because it's all within a year. So maybe this could be that people just claim and they show up in my data as claiming this year, but they actually retired after claiming or something like that. So I'm going to look at lags prior to claiming. And we see that this pattern, while it gets smaller more as you move out further, especially 1 to 2 years prior to claiming, we see that same pattern that people who are already not working 1 to 2 years prior to claiming are more likely to be claiming early than those who are still working. I'm not sure I want to take this as any sort of like story of displacement to claiming or anything like that, so much as that there may be a link between labor force participation status and claiming behavior. So those are kind of motivating our kind of like things that aren't in the present value calculation. The next one is these misbeliefs, and I think this is one of like the areas of the paper that's kind of different. So we see that these individuals have misbeliefs about the Social Security penalty as well as their own survival. So focus first on this left-hand column. What I'm showing you is there's a data set that asks them a true or false question, and it says, your Social Security benefits are independent of the age at which you claim. And so if they report yes to that question, I am going to say that they don't understand. What I'm showing you is the share of people by different education and marital statuses who answer yes to that question. So we see that that varies from almost 20%, specifically for non-college singles, to 5% for married college graduates. So these are not huge percentages, but they're also not insignificant. So there does seem to be a good percentage that don't understand that there is a penalty associated with their claiming, or a credit with their delayed claiming. That does exist. Additionally, we look at another data set. They ask a question of, what is the probability you believe you will live to age 75? We look at age 60, and we see what they report as their probability of living to age 75, conditional on living to 60, and we're going to compare that to their objectively measured probability of survival, dependent on health status at age 60, education, marital status, and see what the gap between these two numbers is. A negative gap would mean that they're optimistic, meaning that they think they have a higher probability of living to age 75 than the objective measures predict. A positive number is pessimism. So if it's blue, they're optimistic and think they're going to live longer. If it's orange, they're pessimistic and they think they're going to die sooner when they will. I don't have a big story about the marital status making you pessimistic. I don't know about that. But if we look specifically, college makes people more pessimistic. I kind of like to think about it as like you've got a distribution around the average life expectancy, and maybe everyone thinks they're average, but where you are in that distribution is actually correlated with these things. College educated workers tend to live longer, married workers tend to live longer objectively, and that's kind of deviating them to make them look pessimistic in the data, that they think they're going to die before they really will. Or they just don't know how long they're going to live. Mainly what I want you to take away from this is these misbeliefs do exist in the data. These are gaps in cumulative probabilities. They're not enormous. In some sense, this 1.4 percentage point, is there really any difference between knowing you have a 50% chance of living and a 51.4%? I'm not sure. But it does translate into per year survival probabilities that make a big difference. But at the end of the day, I care about claiming. So I want to see if this even has an impact on claiming. So I'm showing you on the left is the program rules. So my standard errors are huge because the sample's not that big. But we at least find these point estimates. The left is people who know that claiming age matters for benefits. The right is people who don't know. People who don't know claiming age matters for benefits are more likely to claim early than those who know. Makes sense. So the right graph was my mortality impacts. And we see that those people who overestimate mortality are much more likely to claim early. Finally, we look at bequest motives. Mainly just to motivate the mechanism. What we do is we look at the probability that they believe they're going to leave a bequest at age 60 and separate them to categories. Are they definitely going to leave a bequest? Possibly, or not likely to leave a bequest. People who will possibly leave a bequest appear more likely to claim early. These are people where their decision of when to claim could impact the stock of wealth at death, and so whether or not they retire or leave a bequest or not. So we see this as some evidence that this is going on. I may have to skip a good chunk of the model because I'm going to run out of time. But what we have is we have a life cycle model of male household heads between 25 and 99. They face exogenous shocks to their health, their labor productivity, and their employment status. They are permanently heterogeneous with respect to education. They could be college or non-college. Their marital status, so they're all male household heads, but they could be married or single male household heads. Where if you are married, we will also make you different based on the age gap between yourself and your spouse. So is your spouse the same age as you? Is she 4 years younger, 8 years younger, things like that. They'll also be different with whether or not they understand the Social Security program. Put in the subjective mortality, put in the probabilities of survival consistent with the subjective mortality that I showed you. All the details of US Social Security, and we'll give them choices of consumption, savings, labor supply, and Social Security application. So kind of to the point of the question earlier, retirement and Social Security claiming are independent decisions. My utility function is standard. It looks funky, mainly just because we're going to estimate all of the parameters independently based on education and marital status. So I still have the same utility function, but I have all these E's and M's running around on parameters because I'm going to let them vary based on education and marital status. So they value consumption and leisure, the time endowment, the fixed cost of participation in the market, and the health cost, time cost of being in poor health, are all going to vary based on these heterogeneous types. Okay, my bequest motives, again, are fairly standard. They have a warm glow. They like to leave some sort of bequest at the end of life. If they are single, this is exactly what shows up in most models, that you have some value of leaving back liquid assets, this AT, at the time of death. If you are married, the US Social Security system has a survivor's benefits component where when you die, your spouse can continue to receive benefits until their death. So we're going to put these survivor benefits in here, where if you are married, not only do you leave behind your liquid wealth, you also leave behind the present value of your Social Security benefits over the life cycle of your spouse. So that's where the age gap is going to come into play. So if you have a really young wife, then you're going to be internalizing that you're leaving behind your Social Security benefits for a longer period of time in the form of this bequest. They can be in these 3 health states that I mentioned. How they transition between them, the probabilities are dependent on age, education, and their current health status. Their subjective survival probabilities are again dependent on their health status, their education, their marital status, and their age, their probability of survival tomorrow. They also have their employment status. They could transition in or out of employment, and that's going to be constant across all groups. How it's going to work, this is an annual model. There's really no notion of unemployment here. So how we're going to do it is if you wake up today and you have gotten the unemployment shock, you have the option to immediately re-enter the labor market, but you have to pay a penalty, this Z, is the penalty if lambda is equal to 1. And how we're going to include it is going to be able to, it compounds and like is persistent across, so we can get the wage scarring effects of an unemployment shock in this model. Social Security system is really complicated, I've learned, but I'll try to go through the math in the most intuitive way possible. The Social Security, the size of the benefits received is going to be determined by your Social Security wealth. Your Social Security wealth is a function of your lifetime earnings. So that Social Security wealth evolves and is calculated as the average of your highest 35 earning years of your life. We do it, this nasty term is really just updating. If you like earn more than your average, it'll update, otherwise it stays constant. And it's up until a cap. So at some point, even if you earn more, it doesn't contribute to your Social Security wealth. So that A max is that maximum here. Once we have your Social Security wealth, I'm going to take that and we're going to put it into the piecewise linear function that determines the primary insurance amount. So this is meant to get some redistribution. You get a higher replacement rate on lower levels than you do higher. And it translates this Social Security wealth into the primary insurance amount that your Social Security benefits are calculated on. Once we have that, there's two adjustments. First is the penalty or credit for when you claim relative to your normal retirement age. Claims prior, there's going to be that penalty, and it's going to decrease the amount received. If it's later, it's going to increase. So think of that gamma as going to be that percentage per year based on when you claim. The second one, which someone alluded to before, is the earnings test. In the Social Security system, they do have this earnings test where if you continue to work and earn above a certain threshold, I don't want to call it tax, but kind of is. They tax away your benefits at a very high rate. It's like 50%. They give it back to you later, though. So it's not like you are out of the money. They just like take it away now and they give it back to you once you're old enough. That's all in the model. And that's the second adjustment that you make that'll translate your primary insurance amount into the benefits received. Think of SSB as the benefits received. Our misunderstanding is extraordinarily stark. If you know the rules of the system and you are informed, then you know that you are going to receive this SSB, which is after the adjustments are applied. If you are dubbed uninformed, then you have no idea, and you think you're going to receive this SSB bar that does not include the penalty or credit for your early or delayed claims. We still have the earnings test in there, but we do not have the penalty or credit here. Married households have an additional benefit where if you are married, you could get spousal benefits where the secondary earner is eligible for benefits up to 50% of the head of households. So married households, we're going to assume that all of the secondary earners are claiming on the primary earner's record. And depending on when you claim, you could get up to 150% of your Social Security benefits. So there's going to be this scale factor delta that's either 1 if you're single, or could be up to 1.5 as long as your wife is at least 65 at the time of claiming. But somewhere between there. The only reason I want to show budget constraints is the misinformation makes a difference here. I told you it was stark, and it really is stark. Prior to claiming, you live your entire life thinking what is going to enter your budget constraint is this perceived Social Security benefits that'll show up when you claim. But once you claim, the true Social Security benefits are revealed, and what enters is that true benefit. Beyond that, things are pretty much what we see in literature. They choose consumption, they'll choose savings. They have this function W of all their income. So there's labor income based on how many hours they work. The YST is some sort of spousal income that we estimate from the data. And then they get interest income, they pay taxes, all of these things. They cannot borrow, they can save, and we'll have a consumption floor where they can receive taxes or receive transfers to bump them up until that floor. Don't need to go through all of it, but life is split into 3 different categories. From 25 to 61, they're working age. They spend their lives working. They choose consumption, savings, and their hours. Once they turn 62, they enter into this, too far, retirement age, where they turn 62. They now have an additional option of claiming Social Security. So they have one more state variable where they have entered as either claiming or not. And in that period, if they have not claimed, they have the option to claim. Claiming is an absorbing state. Once you claim forever. So these people who enter make that decision. Once they turn 70, I'm going to assume they're all retired. And they're going to make consumption and savings decisions for the rest of their life. Real bad on time. We estimated all these things from the data. We have a lot of different data sources. Specifically, we're going to estimate this on a cohort of men born between 1931 and 1935. All these parameters are estimated separately by education and marital status. So that's going to allow us to have different impacts of, or different patients, kind of bequest motives, all these things being different based on who you are. We can talk more about this later if people are interested. We estimate those parameters to target life cycle labor supply and wealth moments. So we're going to target participation, hours worked conditional on participation, as well as assets by education and marital status. These are targeted, so we should do a pretty good job. So I'm not going to harp on it too much, but those are where we're getting these parameters. Our untargeted moments, we do not target Social Security claiming at all. So this is kind of like, we see this as a big win. Here what I'm showing you is claiming behavior in the model and the data. The x-axis is claiming, it's the cumulative percentage who have claimed based on any age. So we do miss 62 claims some. There is a literature on behavioral motives for 62 claiming. I can say that I think the gap between our 62 is probably some of that, but we do really well on total early claims. So this dot here in the middle is total early claims, and we're almost spot on there. So maybe we don't get right exactly 62, but we do get right that you will have claimed by 65. And we get delayed claiming pretty well too. Again, completely untargeted. We also get qualitatively and some quantitatively well the difference based on some of these things that I showed you before. So work status, health status, education level, marital status we're a little off. It looks better now, but I don't have those results all right. So we're doing pretty well, not only on the total claiming, but also kind of the gradient in claiming based on these different fixed types. Qualitatively, they're all right. Quantitatively, some are close. The other thing we do decently on, if we look at wealth at age 60, I think this is a huge puzzle. Even the rich people are claiming early in the data. So our model actually over-predicts the decline in early claiming by wealth quintile. The bottom row is the data. You can see that that percentage that are early claiming based on where you are in the wealth distribution at age 60 doesn't decline that much. It declines about 15 percentage points, but it's still 60% in the highest wealth quintile. Our model, we get the downward slope. We do over-predict the amount that will decrease by wealth. So there are some very wealthy people who are giving up a lot of money who can afford to delay. I don't really have time, so I'm going to skip that. But okay, we want to kind of break down who these things matter for. So what I have here is our counterfactuals. The first line is the benchmark. So the 63 is that dot in the middle I showed you of total early claims in the aggregate. So 63% is what our model predicts total early claims should be. And the variation in early claims by these permanent heterogeneous types are what I'm showing you here, with non-college singles claiming really early at high rates versus lower rates for the married college individuals. Then I want to break down kind of what's driving some of these early claims. So first I'm going to look at what we call non-policy frictions. This is everything except the spousal benefits. So we're going to leave the marriage, both the spousal benefits and the survivor's benefits there, but get rid of the unemployment shocks, the health shocks, the bequest motives, all the other things that I had talked about at the very beginning. And the misinformation is still in there. And we see that this drops early claiming, particularly among college singles. It drops for everyone other than the college, non-college married. It's not very quantitatively important, but it does increase a little. But it's not huge. We still get 40% early claims, even when we get rid of all these shocks. What's kind of going on here is, if you live past 80 or 78, you should get more by delaying. And that's kind of going on in the background of the model. There are people who are going to die before 78. So even if I get rid of all of these shocks and things, particularly these non-college singles, these guys are most likely to die prior to age 78. And so it kind of is in their best interest, even in the absence of all these different frictions, to claim early. Now I want to get rid of the marital benefits. So you don't get the 50% for spousal benefits. You don't get that extra bequest motive for survivor's benefits. There's no impact on singles because they weren't getting them anyways. So we see the same patterns. The early claims of these married guys goes to 0. Now it's not exactly 0. I think it's like 0.003 or something crazy, but they completely disappear. There's a strong incentive for these married individuals to push claim early, because even though they're taking a percentage penalty, the level of benefits they receive is still higher than what they would if they were single. So that's outweighing even the penalty they receive, and they claim early. There is a decline in that early claiming by age gap. So if you have a very young spouse who is not Social Security eligible, then you don't have a strong incentive to claim early because you're not going to get that 50%. We can break it all down based on all the different things separately, and I don't have time to show you everything, but the precautionary motives or the health, the unemployment is very important for singles and non-college educated individuals who lack that insurance that comes from having higher wealth or the spousal income. The misinformation is really important for these wealthier guys. These are guys who have all the income, all the wealth in the world to afford to delay. So in order to get them and think about their early claims, we really need some things that are very kind of deviate them a lot. The last thing I want to show you in my remaining like 2 minutes is our policy experiment. So we increased the normal retirement age to 70. So the blue line is the benchmark. This is the penalty or credit, or like what you get relative to the normal retirement age. So you see that claiming at age 62 was associated with a 20% penalty in our benchmark, versus it was up to a 30% credit if you delayed all the way to 70. By increasing the normal retirement age to 70, we're moving this to the orange line. So any claims prior to age 70 entail some penalty, and now 62 claims have a very large penalty. So this is a very extreme reform. I'm not saying that necessarily I think that this is being talked about, but just to kind of get the idea of what's going on. Blue is the benchmark, orange is this new policy. And this is the claiming distribution in these two situations. So we do see this shift in claiming to delay claims. But we also see that a lot of it's coming from 65 claims. The drop in age 65 claims and delaying past 65 is a lot bigger than the drop in 62, 63, 64. These people who are claiming that early, if these frictions are still around, they're still going to claim that early. And if we break this down by our types, the top row is non-college, bottom is college, left is single, right is married. Most of these adjustments are coming from the married guys. In particular, the college married guys, because they're the ones that have the wealth to delay. So even in this friction world, they can push their delays later, or claims later. The singles and the non-college singles in particular, there's not a big difference. So these guys are now taking a large penalty because they can't adjust their decisions in response to the new policy. How that matters? What I'm showing is the change in the present value of benefits received under the benchmark and normal retirement age of 70. So in our benchmark, when we increase the retirement age to age 70, normal retirement age, the present value of benefits decreases for everyone mechanically because there's now a penalty for anything. And we see that this decrease is 25%, about 25%, but it does vary based on these types. With married and college married taking smaller cuts because they can afford to delay. If I look at this in a world with no frictions, so get rid of everything that I have in there, the employment, health, bequests, misinformation, spousal benefits, everything. It's going to predict a lot smaller decrease in these benefits lost. So we're going to be predicting that people change their behavior more. They don't take as large of penalties in the new world, and therefore their benefits don't decrease as much. I told you at the beginning, my kind of like aha number, that if we didn't account for these frictions, we would get the aggregate payouts wrong by 40%. This is the gap I'm talking about. So if I take these losses and I aggregate them over the whole population, I take this 25% decrease or these smaller decreases in the frictionless world and aggregate them across the population and compare the total amount paid out by the government in this benchmark world and this no frictions world, we're going to see that the number of what the government pays is going to be 40% higher in this frictionless world than in the no frictions world, because we're going to overpredict the response of individuals in their claiming decisions and get wrong the number. So they're going to save more money. It's kind of I mean, it's good from a policy perspective, not a great thing to say out loud though, because we're not predicting people to adjust as much. So all these channels together, we're explaining that 78%. So I want you to think of that 78% as like when I got rid of both policy frictions and non-policy, how there were still people who were claiming early. Those are the 22% that are not here, are not in this number. But the model's still predicting to claim early. It gets all of it for college and married guys. Now in this latest version, they still have some, but it's still pretty low. We get a heterogeneous response by these education and marital groups, where marital benefits are very important for the married guys, as are misbeliefs, versus these budgetary considerations are much more important for the singles and the non-college educated. When we increase the retirement age to 70, we do see some adjustment, but it's the married workers and the college educated workers who are more able to adjust their claiming behavior. And this is going to lead to large losses in benefits relative to a lower normal retirement age for singles and lower education individuals. So, okay, that's what I have, but I'm happy to take questions or comments, anything.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you everyone for coming to the room and joining the discussion, and also thank everyone joining us online.